Okie dokie. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Welcome to Fair and Medicine's webinar. 27 years ago, I stood proudly in an auditorium with new medical students reciting the Hippocratic Oath and donning my white coat for the very first time. On that day, I dedicated my life to serving humanity. I pledged to practice medicine with conscience and dignity, and to give respect and gratitude to my deserving teachers. I vowed to maintain the utmost respect for human life and to never use my knowledge contrary to the laws of humanity. Today, I sit here as the director of Fair and Medicine, an organization dedicated to upholding the Hippocratic Oath and restoring medicine to its true form. Today's webinar, I am speaking with Dr. Stephen A.R. Murphy on the topic of obesity, weight loss management, specifically related to medications and medication safety and informed consent. Obesity is the second leading cause of preventable death in America. Losing and maintaining a healthy weight is complicated, but influences from food, medical, and pharmaceutical industries complicate it even more. So today we're going to actually talk about this with Dr. Murphy, who is the author of Weight Loss Secrets Revealed, Your Ultimate Guide to GLP-1 Medications. Dr. Murphy is a board-certified internal medicine and obesity specialist, accomplished author, an esteemed professor in cell biology and anatomy. At the helm of Concierge Medical Associates, he specializes in longevity and regenerative medicine. Lots of hats this guy is wearing. You know, he's like making me feel like an underachiever. But anyway, where he leverages advancing genetic technology and cellular technology and uses energy therapies like laser light and near infrared light to offer personalized, innovative healthcare solutions. Renowned for his dedication to comprehensive wellness, Dr. Murphy's unique approach to patient care, which combines his academic prowess with a deep understanding of individual needs, sets him apart in the field and makes him a perfect guest for our webinar today. So welcome, Dr. Murphy.
Well, Dr. Johnson, thank you very much. I'm honored to be invited to not only just this webinar, but to talk with you. We've known each other as Twitter friends for almost a decade. So I think we've been following each other any way, shape, and form. And so I'm really happy to be on this webinar with you. So thank you very much.
Yes, so am I. You know, I since you brought that up, I think it's really important for viewers to know that there's some things that we disagree with, right? You know, politically, I think we're probably on two different sides of the aisle. And maybe we share some disagreements about how COVID was managed. But on the things that we agree on, we strongly agree and we can work together. And I think it's important in a political climate that is so divided right now, and very heated. I think it's important that we spend time talking with each other about how to solve problems in the way that works for us all and on the things that we agree upon, right? So I am just so excited to have you here. And there's not a lot of, we were talking before the webinar started about how there's so much that doctors need to know how to do and how to help people, and how we've strayed away from actually getting people healthy and, you know, preventing illness and maintaining health. And in a 15-minute consultation or, you know, first evaluation for an annual checkup, it is impossible to cover all of the issues that concern patients, and in addition to helping them to maintain health and prevent disease. So specialists like you are extremely important. And you know, it's really important to be able to hear and listen to you on this topic, because I can tell you that you know, I wouldn't know the first thing about what to do if a patient came to me and asked me to talk about weight loss. I can give them a few pointers, like, what you put in needs to match what goes out. But I can't, and I can go down, I can remember a little bit of my biochemistry and things like that, but it is not an area of expertise of mine at all. And I think it's not really fair to ask a bunch of general doctors practicing to be able to be, experts at this. And so we need you, and I thank you for it. So let's dive in. I just, I really want to make this conversational, but I want people to get the most out of this. For first off, you've written books about this stuff, um, and we're talking about a drug. We're talking about a drug, particularly GLP-1 agonist, the specific one called Ozempic. Let's just make sure the audience doesn't, let's clarify. Do you have any disclosures or any any conflicts of interest with industry related to any of these drugs?
Fantastic question. I run my own private practice in Connecticut, New York City. I'm also licensed in South Carolina, where I focus on longevity, and part of longevity is weight loss. I'm a board certified obesity medicine specialist. I sit on no corporate boards, whether it be Kellogg's or Pfizer or Novo. I'm not a paid spokesman for any of those entities. I see patients pay me. I do not receive any royalties from any prescriptions of any medications that I write for or meal plans that I give to people. But I do have a book that describes in detail the risks and benefits of using medications like Ozempic as a class called GLP-1 receptor agonists. I'm an assistant professor at New York Medical College. My views today that we talk about do not represent New York Medical College or the Touro University system. I teach in the pathology course there. I've taken a couple of years off, but I teach the genetic basis of disease there, where we talk about genes and how they influence common chronic diseases like obesity, as well as rare diseases in that venture. I have no other conflicts of interest to disclose.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. Patient comes to you. How did they even get to you in the first place?
I don't
there.
know. One of the big things, Nikki, is it okay I call you Nikki?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. You call me Steve. So it's very funny, Nikki. I get patients lots of ways, right? Either a regular primary care physician. And so in a full disclosure, I have a very small primary care practice on my own, which is a concierge medical practice. So a part of my practice actually still do primary care. It's not a big part of the practice, but it's a part nonetheless. So often I'll get a patient referred to me through a primary care practice, whether it's a pediatrician's office or an internal medicine office or an orthopedic office where a patient is going to have knee surgery and they need to lose weight to have a good outcome. Or a bariatric surgeon will send me a patient for a medical management and weight loss program prior to their insurance paying for these sorts of things. But right now, where I'm seeing a huge uptick in patients is Twitter and Reddit, Nikki.
Wow.
I have a massive Reddit following. People.
Oh my gosh. Is there like a Dr. Murphy fan club,
No.
Reddit channel?
It's actually a weight loss Reddit stream like r/Ozempic. And so these sites say, this guy knows how to manage your medication and you won't get strung out because let's face it, there are a lot of online programs where you can go and get either bootleg Ozempic, which is what I call compounded medications. Mm-hmm. Some are safe, some are not, and you have to be very careful there. Or patients whose doctors don't know how to use the medication, wrote it, and they had an adverse effect. And so they'll find me through the interwebs, right? And Reddit is actually a big place now where I'm getting patients. Sounds crazy, right? I don't want to be a tinfoil hat wearing guy, but Reddit is where I'm getting a lot of patients.
That's just so fascinating to me. I just think, I don't. I have a Reddit account, but I'm not on there that often. But I realize that there are people out there who form communities and really solidly on Reddit, and it's still happening. I'm just amazed. I don't know. I don't know why I'm shocked
Yeah, no,
at
but
this
that's
point.
it.
But
I'm shocked
I
too,
think it's a
Nikki.
great thing.
I'm shocked too. I get them from
Yeah,
Twitter or any other of those as well.
yeah,
But Reddit is a massive amount of patients I'm seeing for weight
yeah.
loss.
That's fantastic. Okay, so when a patient comes to you who because I would imagine that a person coming to you for preparation for bariatric surgery is going to be different than a person who's coming to you because they have chronic disease and they want to manage their weight loss, manage their weight, or just because they think they're obese and they want to prevent, or they are obese, or and want to prevent the development of chronic disease. I would imagine the approach to those patients is different.
I'm going to
How,
tell you something right now, Nikki.
yeah,
And this is a little controversial, right?
okay,
If someone is coming to us in preparation of bariatric surgery, and this is controversial because the bariatric centers popping up all over the place and how they can amazingly reshape people, we failed them. Bariatric surgery is
yeah,
like open heart
yep,
surgery for heart disease.
yep,
It's
yep,
just it's the same. You're
yep,
changing anatomy because you failed to prevent something.
yes,
And in the end, all of these patients, is going to sound crazy. All of these patients have one thing that has been failed, and that is managing their hunger.
yep,
Obesity it's complex, but in the end, if you want to do it simply, it's managing that patient's hunger. And in children, both you and I trained with the little ones, right? In pediatrics, I did pediatrics and then internal medicine. Children cannot lose weight if they feel hungry, ever,
absolutely,
ever.
yeah, yep,
And
yep.
so,
And they're at the mercy of the food supply of the
oh,
person who provides that food supply.
so can we have a second to talk about even more scandalous, right? So, um, a long time ago, I had a podcast where I interviewed Callie Means. Callie and Casey have been really pushing forward the fact that our food supply is tainted and that there are chemicals in it causing addiction. All of that is true. The problem is, just like you said earlier, it's very polarized and politicized. So a lot of my friends, when I had Callie on the on my old podcast, I don't even have it anymore. But when I was on there, they said, you better be careful who you're hanging out with. You're going to have big problems. And that is because we're viewing this from a polarized set. And we shouldn't. We should acknowledge the fact that big food corporations were bought by big tobacco corporations, and therefore the modality with which they produce food has a modus operandi of selling more food. It's a corporation. And if we're honest with ourselves, with corporations that are publicly traded, their goal is to drive their bottom line. It's not to make healthy food, right? That's not their job.
Right.
Their job is to sell.
To sell a product. Yeah.
That's it. And unfortunately, we're the product, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah. Yes, okay, so that's depressing. But
All right, sorry, I don't want to be a buzzkill, but like,
no, that's okay.
let's be
That's
real
okay. I mean,
adults.
like honestly, like we could have a whole session just talking about that. And like even that can be that discussion itself can be polarizing, because when you start to talk about preservatives, some of those things are necessary to keep us from getting sick,
You
right?
listen, let's face it,
Right?
the whole industry developed to prevent starvation.
Yes.
Starvation, you can't grow a civilization
Yeah.
if people are starving. The Chinese
Yep.
had that issue
Yeah.
for millennia. That's their
Right.
biggest problem, and their
Right.
biggest fear is starvation. So
Yep.
corporations with big food have helped civilization grow. Unfortunately, they've grown too much at the
Yes.
waistline. And so
Yeah.
now this needs to be adjusted,
Yep.
right? That's all.
Yep. You got it. You got it. Okay. All right. So this person's in your office
You bet.
and they want to lose weight. What's kind of the first words, what's the first speech you give them? Like,
Oh, I think the first important thing is to tell them it's not their fault. And it sounds a little crazy, but they already think it's their fault. They've already been told by society it's their fault. They're already told by their doctor that they didn't have enough willpower. They're told by their parent, and when they're a kid, and think about it as a kid, right? Imagine being an obese kid. Hi, I know I was, but then I had a growth spurt, and then I found sports, and then I stayed athletic, even into college. But if I didn't like sports, if I didn't fall into them, I would have the gene set up, right? So genetically, I'm an admixture of European, Puerto Rican, and Puerto Rican is very interesting. Puerto Rico has a real admixture. You have Taino, you have European colonialist, and you actually have a big population of Yoruba. So this is an African admixture.
yeah,
And so I have all of that on one side of my family. And on the other side, I have a Northern European mutt mix. And so when you have these things, you have to recognize that there's different metabolic makeups. But culturally, some cultures advocate thinness, other cultures advocate hardiness. And in addition to that, you have the thought of, well, if I can feed my child and they're not skinny, then I'm doing a good job as a parent. So you have all of that going into that patient that shows up at your door. And so you have to understand them culturally. And you have to understand that in the face of what I like to call a dirty fish tank, which is all of the food that you can eat now. Most of it is dirty. And so because of that, how are you going to clean their fish tank? And as you can see with all of that together, it's crystal clear. It's not their fault. It doesn't mean that they can't take control of it, but it means that how they got here was they can't shoulder that on their burden on themselves, or they're not going to lose weight.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so that makes sense. That makes a lot of
I'm
sense.
not an enabler, right? Like the
Yeah.
flip side
Yes,
is
I
I'm
see
not
what you
trying
mean.
to enable
Yeah.
people. No way.
Yes.
And the next
Yep.
step is it's not your fault, but you can fix it.
Got it. Yeah, that's
fix it.
important. I think so. I mean, I think that's a little bit of psychological weight loss that you can
Yeah, you got it.
you can give them right away.
Unyoke the guilt,
Yeah.
and then empower.
Yep. Perfect.
Then
Okay.
you have to understand why they want to lose weight.
Okay.
Because they're at your door because they want to lose weight. And that's a key in something we call motivational interviewing. What is your motivation to lose weight? And that's the whammy button, Nikki. That's where you're going to press them every time it's difficult for them. Every time that they come in and have a challenge, you're going to remind them of why they're on this journey.
Okay. All right. So you've met this patient, you understand their cultural background, there's this, there the social factors that contribute to
you can't do that in 15 minutes, Nikki.
Foods they
right?
eat. Hey, I know we're fast forwarding. We're fast forwarding in webinar time.
You got it. You got it.
All right. So you've learned all this stuff about your patient. You guys have, you've got like a nutritional history on them.
You bet.
You've done a physical exam, and everybody agrees this patient needs to lose weight, right?
Sure. Yeah.
How do you decide which methods you would use? And then, and specifically, when do you introduce the idea of medications to help?
Great point. As I said earlier, the most important thing to manage in that patient to help them lose weight is hunger. There are a lot of ways to manage hunger, right? There are a lot of ways. And one of those ways is understanding that there are certain chemicals in our body. We don't see a lot of obese gazelles. Why? They're obese, they'll get caught, they die. And we don't see a lot of obese lions. Why? If you're an obese lion, you're not going to catch up. our natural hormones in our body tell us when we're full. They tell us when we're full. And at the same time, you look at a panda, right? A panda has to eat all day long to get the caloric nutrients that they need. And so some animals don't have that effective mechanism to say, I'm full. Most animals, as a general rule, do. Okay? Most animals do. And humans are no different. We have neuropeptide YY, we have cholecystokinin, and we have these other hormones in our body called the incretins that tell us we're full. And another one is leptin. There's a whole issue with that. So you can think about weight loss as a lack of response to fullness or an overdrive of hunger. And you can do lots of different things to help them with that. There's a doctor out there, Jason Fung, his claim to fame is fasting. And he wrote a book first on fasting before he wrote a book on the obesity code, which talks about incretins, which are one of the subtype of hormones that help us say, time to stop eating, push the plate away. And so you have to ask, are we going to be able to get this patient to do the lifestyle things to increase their incretins, to beat down their insulin resistance or not? Unfortunately, if you use insurance, Nikki, you know as well as I do, you've got 8 minutes to figure that out in the first visit. So maybe you'll bring them back in the second visit, which will demotivate them because they wanted to get started in visit 1.
Yep.
And so what invariably happens is people will write for a medication.
Yep.
Let me write for a med right away. Go see the therapist, and refer the rest of it out.
Yeah.
And that's when they wind up in my doorstep with, I took this Ozempic, my belly hurts, and I can't take it anymore. Oh, and the insurance company stopped paying for it. So I need to figure out how to do what needed to be done in the first place. And so that, I think that's a big challenge in an insurance-based system, is getting those resources you need.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, and it's obviously a big driving force for prescriptions,
For
for
sure.
prescription drugs, right? So you're limited your time with the patient. You feel compelled to do something, because if you don't do something, maybe, perhaps you are going to get dinged for,
right.
for having a practice
metric,
full of
right?
unhealthy patients with, high hemoglobin A1Cs,
right?
Or you work in a large health system where your salary and your employment is based on the number, the amount of revenue that you generate. And if you don't prescribe things or do perform tests or do procedures, your revenue, based units are going to be low. So there's lots of reasons that compel doctors to go and prescribe. But if they want to do it responsibly, say you've done everything you thought, with this patient, and you believe that Ozempic is the right choice for this patient, what are the things that, what are the things that you think about, one, before prescribing, and then two, what are the things that you tell that patient are going to happen? What's the effect of the drug? What are the possible side effects?
I think that's a great question. And you have to be prepared to deliver that in an informed consent fashion with a patient, because there are adverse effects, right? The most common adverse effects are nausea, vomiting. I've even seen delayed gastric emptying, where their stomach is, I hate to use the word, but it's paralyzed for a small amount of time. And so you have to plan for those things. In addition to that, there are certain contraindications that you have to review, including if they've had a family history of medullary thyroid carcinoma, or even more rare, that they have a family history of a genetic condition called MEN2, or multiple endocrine neoplasia syndrome type 2. Okay. You also have to remember that in patients who have high insulin, the medication like Ozempic will actually increase your insulin first, which may lead to a reactive hypoglycemia. you have
Hmm.
low sugar. In addition to that, as I blab about all of it, it's not just the sugar and metabolism. You can actually have issues cardiovascularly. Now, there are some studies now that have shown that this medication helps reduce mortality and morbidity and prevent heart failure. Well, so pretty soon all the cardiologists are saying, "Oh, this is a cardiac drug. I'm going to give them a cardiac drug," only to find out it actually increases your heart rate. And so that may not be a big deal unless someone has a sensitive heart and can feel palpitations. It may not be that big a deal, but you have to prepare a patient for that, because if you're going to write a medication and have a treatment plan, you have to make sure that the patient can be compliant, right? Able to follow your plan. So you have to let them know the side effects ahead of time. If you don't do that, and if you're in an 8-minute session, you're going to get a lot of phone calls down the road, and your inbox for Epic will be filled with things you have to respond to. So you have to be mindful of that. These are the predominant side effects. There are also other rare ones. People talk about pancreatitis. That's rare.
Okay.
But it's more the rapid heart rate, the nausea, the vomiting. And a lot of times you have to make sure you can dial in the dose or titrate a dose of the medication for that patient. These can be very effective medications, and there's a lot of new published benefits. But just like you said, you have to be willing to explain to the patient those risks ahead of
So
time.
how does it work itself? And was it originally approved for weight loss, or was it approved for something else, like diabetes, since you
So,
mentioned?
so it's a great point. The first types of medications were Saxenda and Victoza, the initial incretins that we used. And back in 2013 and 2015, I was using these medications for weight loss off label. Why? Because I saw my diabetics lose weight on the medication, number one. But number two, Nikki, I'm board certified in obesity medicine and have been since 2012. So I knew the power of GLP-1s, which is called glucagon-like peptide 1. I knew that it controlled hunger. And
Doctor,
yes.
how dare you understand pharmacology and physiology and use a drug off label?
Yeah, I know. And so this is my big problem, right, Nikki? I mean, after I left Yale, I went out on my own, and I sit on academic research boards with people from NIH, FDA, all of these other places, and they call me the cowboy. Why? Because I use my basic science knowledge, and we don't have an institutional policy at Concierge Medical. We have do what's right for the patient. And so I would get laughed at board meetings like, "Hey, that was really smart of you to do, but it'll never fly at I think of one, that'll never fly at HUP," right? Because I had people from the University of Pennsylvania that were working with me. And that's the problem. We need to recognize that physicians have had pharmacology, can continue to understand cell biology, and apply those mechanisms. And in this case, we were using Victoza and Saxenda with great success. Now, as a reminder, those medications were weaker GLP-1 receptor agonists. The ones that we have now are like they're on steroids. They're 10 to 20 times as strong in effect as Saxenda or Victoza.
Okay. So what do you tell a patient when you're prescribing Ozempic or something like it? What it's going to do for them? How it's going to work in their body, how it's going to make them feel?
So my patients nickname me the professor, right? Because when they come to the office, we actually talk a lot about hunger. And we talk about chemicals in the brain, and I'll draw little diagrams on a whiteboard, usually a little small whiteboard I have. And I'll explain to them why they're hungry all the time. And the best part of GLP-1s is that they help with hunger by working a couple of places. They work on your GI tract. They slow gastric emptying, which we talked about the risk there of partial or temporary paralysis of your gastrointestinal tract. But they also work on your hypothalamus. And most people don't realize this. You have a rheostat in your body for weight. And this had been proposed for a long time with the caloric model versus the caloric partitioning model versus lots of different models of how we burn our calories and where we store our energy. And we know that in the hypothalamus, we can regulate or work on your weight set point. Now, this used to be verboten back in the day when Frito-Lay and Pepsi were saying it's a calories in and out problem. And we know that the incretins actually work on your hypothalamus to do a couple of things. One, they help reduce hunger. And remember, obesity is a hunger problem. You can dance around all the other insulin and all these other things. And there's a ton of hormones involved, but obesity is a hunger problem. And so these medications work on hunger, not just by working on your GI tract, but also working in your brain. And so that's probably the more powerful part that we're going to find with GLP-1s.
Okay. And so, after the first dose, what should is there a standard first dose, or is it dosed by weight dose?
So there's a titration schedule for these medications. And they're different doses depending on them. And I can mention that, but I'll tell you this. There's a newer one that's even more effective at weight loss called retatrutide, which will be coming out next year. So I can go ahead and tell you, start them low and slow, 0.25 milligrams for an Ozempic, or 2 to 5 milligrams for a Mounjaro.
And are these pills that they're taking, or are they?
So
okay.
Mounjaro, called tirzepatide, does not have a pill form.
Okay.
But Ozempic, semaglutide, actually does have a pill form. It's called Rybelsus.
Okay.
And in my clinical experience, it's not as effective at helping people lose weight, predominantly because it's a daily medication versus a weekly shot. And the delivery mechanism is different. But the secondary effect I find here is it's not as effective because people hate taking a medication every day.
Okay.
People just really don't enjoy taking pills.
That's interesting. And so, if it's, if you're prescribing an injectable, are they coming to your office to get the injection, or are they able to do this at home?
So 80% of my patients come into the office for the first injection. That's really a real number.
Okay.
20% of people don't want to have to come back for another visit. And so with them, we send them a video instruction, or we do a telemedicine where we walk them through their first injection. And once these medications, if they're not in a compounded form or a bootleg form, they come with an injector pen.
Okay.
Now, the problem, though, Nikki, with that is the injector pens have created a shortage of the medications. And so you'll go to a pharmacy and they'll be like, oh, we don't have any more. Why? Because they don't have any more injector pens. So there's been a big push by people, especially in the obesity industry, to what they call release the vials, meaning just give me a vial of this medication. I can draw it up on my own like testosterone and inject myself. Most people cannot do that, Nikki. Most people need an injectable pen for not only control of the dose, but for preventing risk of adverse effect. If you hit someone with a higher dose of this and they're not used to it, you can have all sorts of problems.
Yeah. I can I have psoriatic arthritis
Oh,
and I take injectable medicine and I much prefer like an auto injector or at least a pre-filled syringe so that I'm not having
correct.
to compound things myself.
And you're a physician.
Reconstitute
And
things.
Nikki, you're
Yeah,
a
and I'm a
physician. You've
physician.
given
Yeah,
injections in the past.
I
Like,
have. I absolutely have. I'm trained to give immunizations and all
yeah,
kinds of injections. Yes,
correct.
absolutely. But doing it on my own, I mean, and especially some of the formulations of things can, have a pH that's not so fun to go
Correct.
underneath
So
the
it'll stay.
skin,
I know my
or in
youngest,
a muscle, so it could be very
it's true. My
painful.
youngest boy is on a monoclonal antibody for his eczema. And when he injects that, it hurts. You have to run him around the house and outside of the house, and he'll cry and
Yeah,
avoid it. Some
yeah,
of these pHs, they're not kind.
yeah,
You're correct.
yeah. Okay, so that's really interesting. Okay, and so has this also had an effect on patients with diabetes who are prescribed
Oh, for
um
sure.
these medicines? Like,
For
were they
for sure.
available of the drug? Is that
Absolutely.
okay?
So
Okay.
you're talking about kind of three different things, right? As one. So I'm going to go over them in good fashion.
Okay.
Number one, these weight loss medications, Ozempic and Mounjaro,
Okay.
are approved for diabetics. They have doppelgangers called Wegovy for Ozempic and Zepbound for Mounjaro that are able to be written for people without diabetes. So if you write for Ozempic, in a lot of cases, your insurance company will deny it if you don't have proof of diabetes.
Interesting.
And does that
Now,
make
wait,
any
can we go
sense to
back to
you?
the regulatory component of that? Is the reason why that is because were these other names the same drug, but FDA approved specifically for the treatment of obesity?
Correct. And
Okay.
that's number one. But there's
Okay.
a second point to this I think that you're going to find very interesting. The pharmacy benefits managers, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are
Mm-hmm.
these middleman companies that are supposed to negotiate lower rates for medicines, but instead are jacking up the rates of medicines and skimming the cream off the top,
Yep.
which we have all sorts of evidence of doing it. And wherever your political stance rides, I think both sides of the aisle recognize
Absolutely.
that is the business model, is
Yeah.
to scrape the cream off and put it on your strawberries while the gruel gets to the pharmacy.
Yep.
Depending on whether it's Ozempic or Wegovy, the kickback to the PBM is different. And so it is not just the FDA and staying within the FDA lines. As I told you, Nikki, right? I write for gabapentin for chronic pain. That's paid for by insurance. It's not approved by the FDA.
Correct.
Okay.
Not
So
not for chronic pain, right?
correct. Not
Right.
at all. Not for chronic pain.
Right.
And so, but it'll be paid. Why? Because the PBM determines what gets paid, not the FDA.
Yep.
So that's reason two. That's
Okay.
a
All
very
right.
important reason. And so, yes, if you're a diabetic, you're more likely to get Ozempic and likely to get Mounjaro and get the weight loss benefit. It's much tougher. Let's say if your BMI is 27 or 26, you still need to lose a little bit of weight, but you're not likely to get insurance to pay for these medications.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about so in truth, how effective are these drugs? Are we alone? How
Okay.
effective are these drugs? So you got 100 patients that come to your office, and out of that 100 patients who get prescribed whichever version, how how many of those patients are going to achieve weight loss that's beneficial to them?
Right. So rather than quote a bunch of studies and outcomes, because that's all in my book, I can tell you some clinically important points. Um, we use these medications and have a 95% success rate in weight loss, people lose weight on these medications based
Okay.
on my clinical data. The 5% failure rate is actually due to side effects. Patients that cannot tolerate the medications. So I don't want to say it's 100% success rate, but you will lose weight on these medicines.
Yeah.
Done. End of story. Finito.
I mean, well, that's actually really, really positive because, and if, patients are coming to you and they're being monitored by you, and that the reason why it's not working for them is that the side effects are the problem. Then I think that's a great testament to, for the effectiveness of the drug, right? And your practice, clearly, right? So you're doing something right.
Listen,
you're doing something right.
We all are trying to do the best that we can,
Correct.
right? I mean, that's it in the end. But I think part of our success rate is that we have regular follow-ups, right? These patients they're getting either twice a week check-ins or more. Sometimes people need weekly check-ins as well.
Yeah.
And that accountability is a key thing for weight loss. If there's no accountability, then they fly the coop. And that's, again, our practice. Not every practice is like that. Some of them, you go on the internet and they start, like Roe will start sending you Ozempic. And it's compounded Ozempic. Sometimes they can get a deal for a coupon and give you branded version, but a lot of these places don't. And so you're missing an accountability factor.
Yeah.
I think that's very important.
And this is the thing right here that actually inspired me to do this webinar, is because we're seeing this kind of, I call it a craze almost, of people asking for these drugs and going to these places that are online, or these, clinics or people who don't, make this their area of expertise and take the time to get to know the patients, build a relationship, understand why they're having problems with obesity, and take the time to give them full informed consent, and then follow them to make sure that that they're on the right track and not experiencing any side effects. That is my concern, and I think it's a big concern overall in medicine, and why the trust of Americans and between themselves, their doctors, pharmaceutical companies, all this stuff, all the big healthcare cartel, what I call it, the people who just really want to make money off of patients and don't really care for them, are driving this this wedge between us, and people are distrustful of us. And so I think this is really, really key that people understand that they are, yes, genuinely experts out there who can take care of them and help them lead healthier lives. But there are some people out there who are definitely in it for the money part of it, and
Nikki, let's be
not
honest,
invested
right?
in health. Mm-hmm.
If I'm going to retire, I'm going to invest in a fund, because pensions are gone now, right? So I'm going to invest in a fund or a 401k or whatever for money to live when I can no longer see patients or generate revenue or want to retire.
Yep.
That money comes from corporations. Those corporations have to make money. Yep. They have to pay out dividends or annuities or whatever they have. Once you have to do that, you have to deliver shareholder value. You can't make decisions in the best interest of your customers. You make it in the best interest of your shareholders.
Yeah.
And allowing healthcare to be this human interaction changed into, I'm sorry, I have a shareholder, I have a hospital board, I have bond holders because I build a bunch of nice buildings, I have a bunch of retirees, so I've got to take your money to pay that out. That's not, I want to deliver health to you. And so why wouldn't America be distrustful of doctors and healthcare right now? We allowed healthcare to become an annuity for retirees.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether it's United Healthcare or Weight Watchers who did it, or big food or big tobacco. Letting the human healthcare, health, life expectancy system be one that is commoditized. What are we going to expect? How are we going to get the health that we need?
Okay. So how can physicians who want to be responsible,
Hmm.
um, and often it can be a lot easier if you are in a direct primary care or concierge practice
Sure.
like yourself, because you can take the time, you can decide the number of patients who are on your panel,
Right.
and you can take the time with each individual patient, in a way where people who still take, primarily insurance, cannot do that.
So let me,
But how can physicians who really want to learn, um, how to manage weight loss responsibly, um, do that? And especially if they're in an area where they don't have a Dr. Murphy to refer to.
for
If
sure.
they're the
So,
family physician in this
mhm.
rural community and they're the only doctor around, how do they do this?
So Nikki, I grew up in a town of 1,300 people. And in that town, we had the local doctor who did everything
Yeah.
from kids to geriatrics to OBGYN to deliveries. And there are three great ways. And he inspired me to become a doctor, partly because of this. He said, number one, never stop learning. Go to conferences, interact with each other. And so what's amazing that we have is we have streaming platforms, we have Twitter, we have networks of doctors willing to share with each other. You can all follow me on Twitter. Take weight off MD. I'm happy to help teach. But we also have secondarily societies. One of those is the American Board of Obesity Medicine, or the OMA, which is the Obesity Medicine Association. That will help give you continuing medical education, guidance, and even a path towards board certification, although it's not recognized by the cartel we talked about before, the American College of the ACGME, or the American Board of Medical Specialties. But it'll get there. It'll get there. So you can go and take classes to learn about how to manage hunger and weight loss. The third way, and I think this way is very important, there are fantastic doctors on YouTube. It's not like staying at a Holiday Inn
Mhm.
last night. It is actually real educational courses by doctors that they deliver on YouTube. Great ones include Dr. Jason Fung. And however controversial Dr. Tro is, he's controversial, trust me, but he's also an amazing educator. There are tons of doctors out there producing YouTube content. You'll
Yeah.
notice one thing I did not include in those three, and that's going to a pharma rep dinner with
Yes.
Novo or Lilly, right?
Right,
I did
right,
not include those.
right.
And that's because you're only going to get one side of the story.
Absolutely.
Only going to get one side of the story with them.
Yeah. That's so important. And I just, and it circles, it takes me back to the beginning of our conversation with, it's how are you getting a lot of your referrals for patients? The internet. There's for all the negativity that we could talk about internet access, there are some really, really good resources out here, and we just really do need to know where to go. And but I'm encouraged to know that the information is out there for people to actually use and access for free. Like, that's amazing. So we talked about side effects. We talked about the actual effects of these drugs, which is great. I have a friend who is and I don't see any questions or comments, in the chat. Maybe Gavin, if you've seen any on the live stream, please let me know. But I have a friend who is a dermatologist, and she is also very she's she speaks often in her medical society about weight loss and healthy lifestyles. And she tells me about patients who come to her after they've been taking drugs like Ozempic, and have lost a significant amount of weight in a short period of time. And they come to her because of the cosmetic changes that they're seeing, namely loss of muscle mass. So they've got a lot of sagging, sagging skin, loose skin, sagging bags under their eyes, and they really looked aged. Like it's remarkable. And she's really not a fan of these drugs. And so but I think, definitely it's a perspective thing, because she's obviously a dermatologist. So she's only going to be seeing these people taking those drugs who
But
have had this effect, right? And need
it's a
her, and
big
need
point.
her help.
Nikki, this is a big point.
Okay.
She is seeing patients that have not had proper medical care with Ozempic.
Yeah.
Let's be crystal clear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ozempic butt, Ozempic neck, Ozempic eyes, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
These are people that did not have proper medical care with their Ozempic.
Yes.
Because all of these things can be overcome with proper nutrition and follow-up to make sure that they're getting what they need to actually retain their health. And it's an important point you made. They look aged. Yeah. Well, it turns out in the longevity community, which I'm a part of, these GLP-1 receptor agonists like Ozempic are now being touted as longevity agents to prolong your life. And so what good is prolonging your life if you look 30 years older, right?
Yeah.
And so I can see why a doctor would want to poo-poo this, because if you use these medications to, in effect, create a starvation diet, you're not doing yourself any good at all.
Yeah. Yeah. So what can patients do to kind of so we've talked about what physicians can do to learn how to use these drugs effectively and safely and responsibly. Right. What can patients do when they start to see this? I mean, and part of this, I do take, we do have to put some of the responsibility on patients, because I know that there are people who are really want that quick fix. They're going on a vacation, and and they need to forget that, fit in that bikini, but they're not expecting this, and they're order these drugs online, and this is what happens. What can they look for in a health professional who's prescribing these drugs? So that they know that they're doing this safely.
Yeah, I think that's really important. If you're going online on your own for these sorts of things, one of the most important things, as I said before, you can do is watch a bunch of YouTube videos that go over some of the adverse effects and how to offset them. In brief, on this live stream, I'll tell you right now, just like Nikki just said, one of the most important things to do is make sure you have enough dietary protein. Right? A lot of people don't realize that you need between 0.8 to 2 grams per kilogram of protein a day. And what we also found is that protein itself helps curb hunger. So if you want to preserve your muscle mass, you can eat between 1.6 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram. That in and of itself, and you will still lose weight. So let's keep it real. You will still lose weight if you're eating that, but you will preserve your muscle mass. Number 2, resistance training. You're not going to go get on the couch or sit here. We've been here for an hour, You're not going to sit on your duff and keep your muscle mass. So, and it's funny, my kids, they'll go crazy, especially the younger ones. If they're on an electronic for an hour, I make them sit up and do squats. There have actually been studies show that you can preserve muscle mass in children if you every hour you can offset the adverse events of sitting on your duff for an hour, right? Yeah. And they say sitting is worse than smoking. You can offset that by setting a timer every hour, get up and do as little as 10 squats. I'm not saying go get a bar and squat. I'm saying get up out of your seat.
Stand in place. And
stand in place. Get up out of your seat, sit back down. Get up out of your seat, sit back down. 10 times. That's it. Every hour. That is not hard to do. Another thing you can do without this is make sure that when you do have that protein, don't eat it all in one setting. I think you sparse it out. You can move it out throughout the day. There are some people who advocate one meal a day. I think one meal a day is a good dietary strategy if, if, if you do not have a medical condition that requires you to eat more often.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that's important. And in terms of protein sources, we can get into the hot debate about food, but I'll tell you, get whole food. Don't eat it out of a box or a bag. If you're getting your protein sources from whole food, you're doing better off than not.
Okay. Great. Excellent, excellent advice. So, normally, well, we are at the hour mark, and we don't have any questions or comments from the audience. Dr. Murphy, do you have any other points that you would like to make about this topic? Any positive thoughts, or anything that you'd like to plug
I,
before
I,
we end the stream?
I think there's a lot of positivity out there. We have the ability to increase our own incretins on our own. Eat more fiber, eat healthy fats, olive oil, avocados, fatty fish like salmon or even sardines help us boost our incretins. If your insurance did not pay for Ozempic or Wegovy, you can do intermittent fasting. Like we said, there are a lot of ways to boost your own incretins to curb your own hunger. You can drink green tea. You can get enough sleep. We didn't even talk about sleep. There are so many things you can do to lose weight. And you ready for this? In my book, Nikki, that you mentioned, right? Weight Loss Secrets, the ultimate guide to GLP-1 medications. I give you tips to use Chat GPT and artificial intelligence to create your own weight programs, to create your own exercise programs. So even if you don't have access to a doctor, I give specific prompts in that book how to use artificial intelligence as your weight loss coach. And that's probably the cheapest way to lose weight out there, right? You don't have to pay a copay. You don't have to do all sorts of things. And using my prompts in that book, which, listen, the book's only $17. So it's an affordable.
It's cheaper on the Kindle version too, by the way.
Yeah, it is cheaper on the Kindle version. You're right. Although the glossy pictures don't pop, or
that is true.
The Ghrelin gremlin is not as good. But I would
but you can zoom when you have old eyes like me. You can pinch and.
That's true. I'm going to tell you, I promise you, Nikki, if they buy that book and follow the guidance, they will lose weight without having to wait at the doctor's office. And let's face it, that's why people go on Row or Weight Watchers for internet doctors. That book has everything you need to help yourself lose weight. And it isn't, Nikki, it isn't their fault. Our environment is obesogenic, but it is their responsibility, and they can take action to lose weight effectively.
Absolutely love that. I love that so, so much. And it's near health, of course, is near and dear to my heart. And one of the things that I'd like to do on Twitter every now and then is I post threads about ways that you can take charge of your own health and be healthy for free. And so Dr. Murphy just gave us all some great advice about how to do that, how to take responsibility and take charge of our own health. I want to thank everybody for joining us and remind you all that Fair for All is, we survive on your donations. Everybody who works here is, it's either a small part of their job, their day job, or it's all they do. And for people like me, it's all I do. And I appreciate every single one of you joining us for the stream. Those of you who are subscribers to our newsletter, subscriber to our Substack, and also those of you who join us and contribute content for us. But it's also important that we need your dollar support as well. So go to fairforall.org/donate, and you can give us a contribution there. And Dr. Murphy's links to his book, his website and practice are all will all be in the links to this live stream. And so I want to thank everybody again for joining us. Dr. Murphy, for joining me. It's a pleasure having you. I learned a lot today. I hope you guys did too. Have a great day.